If it weren't for that person, I might have died on this cold sidewalk. The yellow streetlight cast a dim glow on the cracked sidewalk. A frail man sat hunched over, shivering, his thin frame wrapped in a worn-out coat that offered little defense against the biting cold of a late winter night. In his trembling hands, an old ballpoint pen quivered with each labored breath. A crumpled, stained piece of paper rested gently on his knee. Traffic had thinned. The city fell into a strange, eerie silence, only the wind whistling through alleyways and the faint, irregular ticking of a dying street lamp remained. The man leaned closer, eyes locked on the paper. Deep set, rimmed with red, his eyes shimmered with tears that clung stubbornly to the corners, never quite falling. Every blink was a struggle, every breath a weight. His calloused fingers gripped the pen tightly, but the cold had numbed them. The words he tried to write became smeared crooked lines like the broken paths of his own life. His lips moved, barely forming the whisper. And if it weren't for that person, I probably would have, but he stopped. The words shattered before leaving his throat, dissolving into the silence. His body trembled as if holding back a sob. His teary eyes held a depth of emotion, gratitude, shame, memory. It was as if he were speaking both to himself and to someone far away, someone unforgettable. The wind howled through the narrow street, carrying the faint scent of exhaust from a bus long gone. Somewhere in the distance, a stray cat meowed, a lonely echo in the cold night. Everything around him seemed so ordinary, yet in that moment time paused. The world narrowed, and centering on the image of one small, solitary man wrestling with memory, with pain, with the desperate need to say something that had waited far too long. His hand clenched the pen. The paper wrinkled under the straining, bleeding like veins across the surface. He exhaled sharply, a puff of white breath curling into the air. Each breath felt like a fight to stay present, to push back the dark. Under the fading light, his eyes glimmered, not with hope, but with resolve. He had to write it, to say thank you, to acknowledge the one person who had once seen him not as a burden, not as a shadow, but as a human being. And in that moment, the question arose, not from him, but from the very frame, from the soul of the story. Do you believe that a single act of kindness can change someone's entire life? The music swells soft but powerful, like a deep breath pulling the viewer in. The camera slowly zooms in on the trembling piece of paper. A single tear drops, sinking into the page, smearing the ink, blurring the words. No answer is needed. That one image is enough to grip the heart. Who is that person? What did they do to reach this man in his darkest hour? And that letter, what does it say? On a crowded street in the city that never sleeps, a stream of people hurried past beneath flickering neon lights, none of them noticing the small figure curled up in a cold corner. Night had fallen. Damp mist clung to the pavement, mixing with the lingering stench of gasoline and leftover trash from a long, noisy day of street vendors. Car horns blared, laughter rang out from nearby sidewalk eateries, an overwhelming contrast between the pulsing life of the city and the silent stillness of a forgotten existence. There he sat, leaning against a wall mottled with green moss and crumbling brick. His eyes were vacant and distant, staring into space, yet seeing nothing. His coat was torn seams, unraveling far too thin to shield him from the cold that seeped into his bones. Calloused hands trembled as they clutched his knees. Each breath came out in a visible puff of white, merging with the damp night air. His voice was hoarse from sleepless nights spent wandering his throat. Parched water itself had become a luxury. Few knew that just a few years ago he was an ordinary man. Some might even say he lived a stable life. He held a modest office job with just enough income to support his small family, a kind wife, and a son in elementary school. Each morning he'd leave home in a crisp white shirt and neatly tied tie, still smiling from the hug and laughter of his boy before stepping out the door. That sound, once full of joy, now echoed in his mind like a dull ache, sharp and piercing. Then the storm came, unannounced, relentless. A traffic accident on his way to work. A truck lost control and crashed into him, leaving his legs severely injured. Months in the hospital followed. The medical bills mounted quickly, forcing his family to sell their modest apartment. In the middle of it all, he lost his job. The company expressed deep regrets and replaced him with someone younger, stronger. It all unraveled: his job, his home, and worst of all, his family. Drowning in debt, his young wife could no longer bear the pressure. She left, taking their son with her. He still remembered his son's last look, confused, frightened, as he was pulled from his father's arms. "Will I come back, Daddy?" That question had never left him, but it was never answered. From that moment, his life spiraled downward. No work, no home, no family. Friends faded away, unwilling to associate with a man who had nothing left. He began to drift, scavenging leftover food from trash bins, sleeping beneath overpasses, slowly adjusting to being treated like a nuisance, like a burden no one wanted. Tonight was no different. People walked past indifferent. Some glanced for just a moment, eyes filled with caution or contempt, before quickly turning away, as if his misfortune might rub off on them. Others didn't bother to look at all. In their eyes, he didn't exist. That pain, the feeling of being invisible, cut deeper than the hunger or the cold. The city's noise continued around him, bass thumping from a nearby bar, laughter from a group of friends, the rhythmic tapping of high heels against the sidewalk. But to him, it all felt distant. He sat there alone in his own world, hearing only the heavy thudding of his heart, the growling of his empty stomach, and the hollow sound of his own breath echoing in the quiet. In his mind, memories collided and blurred. His son's face flickering, fading, his wife walking away without a glance back, the debt notice falling to the floor. The doctor saying the surgery didn't go as expected. Each memory was a blade, each thought a spiral deeper into shame, regret, and pain. He had once believed in resilience, that after the accident he would rise again. But when every door closed at once, there was no strength left to knock on anymore. Day after day, exhaustion ate away at whatever hope remained. Now there was nothing left to hope for except a sleep that he would never wake from. And yet, at the bottom of that pit, a tiny flicker of light had once appeared. A stranger. One person, just one among the endless passing faces, had stopped. Had looked at him not with pity but with empathy. That gaze had stayed with him, a fragile flame, flickering, but never quite extinguished. Still tonight, beneath the dim yellow streetlight, he felt smaller than ever, more invisible than he had ever been. The cold gnawed at his bones. Hunger clawed at his insides. But it was the loneliness that tore at his soul. He looked up toward the night sky, but through the haze of city lights no stars were visible, only a heavy smog-colored sheet. It mirrored his spirit, clouded, lost, without direction, without escape. And he wondered, is there anyone left who truly sees me? Anyone who cares? Anyone who remembers that I ever existed? Night rain fell. Not a hard downpour, but the kind that lingers, fine, cold, and persistent, coming down like pinpricks. Steam rose from the black asphalt, mixing with the smell of gasoline and the iron tang from manhole covers, creating a damp, heavy air that made his chest tight. The man pulled his worn coat collar up. Rain seeped through the thin fabric and ran down his spine. He was thirsty. The dry, raw thirst of a day with barely a sip to drink. His throat scraped like sandpaper every time he swallowed. The corner cafe was still lit. Through the fogged glass, he could see people holding steaming paper cups, lips touching plastic lids as they exhaled little warm clouds. The clink of spoons against cup rims sounded like taunting. He hesitated at the door hand on the cold metal handle. From inside came the roast coffee and creamy butter scent, soft and sweet, like a luxury memory of mornings long gone. He inhaled, gathered whatever courage he had left, and pushed the door open. A tiny bell chimed. Warmth wrapped around him instantly. His hat and graying hair were soaked. Raindrops plopped onto the wooden floor, leaving dark streaks. He stood near the edge of the mat, hands clenched together, trying to keep his voice steady. "May I have a cup of water?" he said, not daring to meet anyone's eyes. "Just water, if possible." The cashier paused for a moment. Her gaze skimmed his tattered coat, his scuffed heels, the battered backpack dangling at his side. Behind him, a line of customers waited, hints of expensive perfume, glowing phone screens. A well-dressed man behind him sniffed, smiling faintly. The cashier lowered her voice, polite, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You have to order at the counter, sir. Complimentary water is only provided with a purchase." He heard that word only like a hook catching in his throat. He nodded, swallowing a dry lump. "I don't have any money. Just a cup of water. I'm so thirsty." A young woman set a latte on the tray, glanced at him, then whispered to her friend. They bent their heads and giggled, the smiles still slipping through the soft jazz playing. His ears burned. To his left, the manager came out in a crisp black suit and perfectly knotted tie. His voice was smooth as silk, but cold. "Sir, we can't give away water for free. Please understand, you can step outside, this area's crowded. Just a small cup. I'll stand in the corner, won't bother anyone." The manager offered the practiced smile of someone practiced in firm politeness. "It's our store policy. Please cooperate." A dry cough came from the end of the line. Someone said loudly enough for others to hear, "This isn't a relief station." The cafe fell silent for a beat. Then everything went back to normal. He stood there, shoulders slumped, staring at the glass pitcher of water on the counter. Thin lemon slices floated, tiny bubbles clung to the rim, only a step away, yet further than the sky. He nodded and stepped back. The bell rang again, this time a harsher chime. A cold gust slapped his face as he stepped outside like a wake-up blow. On the stoop, he tilted his head and let a few drops hit his tongue. Rainwater didn't soothe his throat, only numbed his lips. He bent and cupped the trickle that fell from the edge of the corrugated awning, purplish hands, brittle and dirty nails. He bent over and drank. A bus roared by, tires slicing through a puddle and flinging a dark spray up his pant leg. He didn't react in time. Cold, wet, more humiliation. He glanced at the cafe window and caught his distorted reflection in the fogged glass. A hunched figure, hair matted, eyes reddened. Those eyes had once shone warmly on nights when he read stories to his child. Now they were rimmed red and clouded with exhaustion. His stomach growled, a wet, low sound like a groan. All day he'd had half a piece of bread he'd found in an overfilled trash can after someone tossed it away. His stomach clenched. He clutched his midsection, breath catching. The sharp smell of wet rubber and damp trash rose, making him want to gag. He walked along the shop fronts, avoiding the overly bright spots, instinct telling him. Brightness drew prying eyes. Rain pounded the billboards. Wind hissed through the gap between buildings like a distant whisper. The gray cat he'd seen last night curled in a dry cardboard box, its yellow eyes watching him as if he were another strange creature. It snuffled and burrowed deeper under newspaper. At least it still had a box. Under the overpass, where he sometimes slept, it was crowded. People lay pressed together like logs, raincoats draped as thin, sticky shells. An older man coughed wetly, the sound stretching into a fit. A young woman hugged a damp synthetic blanket. A child next to her curled up, heels dark with mud. He looked at them and swallowed hard today. Even a place to lie down was gone. He returned to the main street. The electronic billboards cycled images of bright smiles, gleaming drinks, waterproof shoes. Occasionally, someone hurried by, umbrella, tilted raindrops splashing on his coat. They talked on phones, laughed, frowned, and disappeared around corners, leaving the rain to sound louder. Every passerby made him feel smaller. Pride, the thing that had kept him upright under everyone's gaze, had become a weight. It jolted him whenever he thought of asking for help. Don't. Each time his eyes met someone's, pride whispered, don't look long. Don't let them see your weakness. But hunger, thirst, cold. All of them whispered the opposite. Speak. Ask. Just one cup of water, a scrap of bread. Two voices collided inside his chest like opposing waves, wearing him down, the fatigue of resisting himself. He wanted to get through the night, just that. But how to survive when every step felt tangled in the net of shame? A group of young men stopped under the same awning, laughing loud. One saw him and muttered something. The laughter got louder. Hey, old man, want a cappuccino? One of them joked in a drawn-out tone, then guffawed as if he'd told the joke of the night. He turned his face away and watched a dark trail of water wind across the pavement. The young man added, if you want a drink, go ask inside. They're generous in there. The group burst out laughing again. Their laughter ricocheted off the awning and struck his ears like stones. Before they left, someone stuffed a crumpled paper into his coat pocket. He startled, thinking it was money, then opened it to find a coupon for a drink, expired last month. He gave a dry, humorless chuckle, then shoved it back into his pocket, as if keeping a small proof of the joke. The rain eased as the clock on the building across the street edged past 11. The crowds thinned. The post-rain chill crept into his bones. He walked along the riverbank where the black water mirrored the lights, rippling like a giant chest breathing. The iron railing was slick with algae. The river smelled of mud, iron, and wet garbage. He stopped and laid his hands on the railing. His chest tightened, not from the river, but from a quick, shadowy thought. What if I let go? The idea flashed and vanished. He stepped back in alarm, as if he'd been standing at the edge of a cliff. His heart pounded until his ears rung. He found a drier concrete slab and sat, hands pressed to his temples. His breathing was ragged. He felt like a room full of echoes. A doctor's voice about hospital bills. An old manager averting his eyes. His son calling dad on a distant sunny afternoon, a friend's wife whispering, I'm so tired. They all crowded him, none willing to be quiet. Don't think, he told himself. Don't pull those memories out to cut yourself. But memories wouldn't obey. They were like rain-grime, damp cold seeping everywhere. Hunger surged again, stronger this time. He rose and headed for the alley behind the night market, where at the end of the day there were often bags with scraps, a half-bitten chicken breast, or a container with a few grains left. He hunched his back. The stink of trash mixed with the fishy reek. A brown streak ran from a drain into the street. He pulled a pair of frayed cloth gloves from his pack and put them on. His hand slipped into a trash bag. The rustle of plastic was loud in the night like crinkling paper. Someone shouted from behind, hey, move on. He flinched, pulling his hand back. A man holding a rubber broom stood near the bins in an orange raincoat, annoyed. Don't make a mess. Clear out. The man stammered, I'm sorry. He stepped back, hands hanging nowhere to hide them. As he left the alley, his stomach twisted again. He paused on a doorstep, set his backpack down, and curled around his stomach, waiting for the cramps to subside. Cold sweat dotted his temples despite the chill. He thought of a warm meal a year ago, his wife's chicken soup. Her hand had set a bowl in front of him, the smell of scallions, pepper, ginger. A memory turned into another blade. He pushed it away but couldn't hold it back. Tears blurred his vision. He opened his backpack and rummaged. There was a dried scrap of pork rind wrapped in tissue. He broke it into small pieces and chewed slowly, using saliva to soften it. Every swallow burned his throat, but the stomach eased for a moment. He drank a few more drops of collected rainwater from the cap of a cracked plastic bottle, exhaled long and heavy. Night deepened. Apartment windows had gone dark. The street held only scattered strips of light and the occasional whine of a taxi slicing through puddles. He returned to the grocery stoop, where a tiny patch of dry concrete sat between two puddles. He spread his old raincoat and leaned his back against the wall. From here, he could see the cafe sign where he'd been refused. Inside, the lights had dimmed. Only the green blink of the coffee machine remained. Someone was wiping the counter. He watched and blinked slowly. A mosquito buzzed in front of him, circled, and landed on his hand. He didn't swat it away. His whole body felt like damp wood, heavy and exhausted. The rain finally thinned to sparse drops, tapping sporadically on the billboard. From afar, an ambulance siren wailed, stretching the night into thin strips. In the dark, the inner dialogue started up again. Ask, just once more. No, you've had enough humiliation. But you want to get through the night. For what? For who? For... He stopped at the word for. In that space, a small face slipped in his son's eyes, curly hair, ink smudge on his cheek from coming home from school. The boy's whisper felt as if he stood nearby, where the smell of tangerine peels and the scratch of pencil shavings lingered. Dad. I'm hungry. The sound snapped him back. No one was there, only the night, but the voice was too clear to ignore. He swallowed. His chest ached. Thoughts of disappearing returned, not in a rush this time, but like an underground stream. If I go, my son won't be hungry because of me anymore. Someone else will take care of him. He squeezed his eyes shut. His hands opened and then clenched, nails biting into his palms until it hurt. The small pain pulled him into the present, like a tether. He opened his eyes and looked at the crumpled paper he'd kept in his coat pocket. The white scrap was old edges curled. Across the middle were a few scrawled, unfinished words from earlier. Thank you for... He shook his pen, its ink nearly spent. The nib scraped the paper. The dry scratch sounded sharp in the night. He managed to write one more word before the ink died. He tapped the pen on his knee. A drop of ink swelled and bled into a faint smear. He breathed hard. If only he could finish writing, he thought. Finish this letter then figure it out. Those few words were his last anchor. They didn't change the cold or the hunger, but they shifted his position in the night from someone shoved along by life to someone nudging himself forward. A small act, but his own act. Wind moved down the narrow corridor. An advertising flyer flipped and caught on his heel. He bent to free it and set it aside. Somewhere a clock struck 12. A new day edged into the city by the thin threads of remaining rain, the smell of baked goods from an early bakery, the metal shutters being pulled up by a street vendor. The man sat there back against the wall, the letter unfinished in his hand. Inside his chest, the noisy inner debate had grown tired. The voice of pride no longer shouted, the voice of despair had grown hoarse. In its place was a quiet that was hard to name. Not peace, but a taut waiting like the surface of a river before the wind rises. The night had pushed him to the very edge, rejection, cold, hunger, humiliation. All exits seemed blocked, and it is often when the wall presses tightest that the smallest cracks show. He hadn't seen them yet. The passerby hadn't seen them. But somewhere down the street, waking up, a tiny light was blinking in the thin mist of another day. So the story didn't end there. It was holding its breath, waiting for a hand, waiting for a look that didn't avert, waiting for a yes where a no had been, and waiting for the man with his wet scrap of paper and his dying pen to, for the first time in a long while, allow himself to believe that the door might just open a little. The street after the night rain was still slick with water. Yellow light from the lamppost shimmered across the puddles, breaking into trembling shapes whenever the wind stirred. The man sat hunched under the shuttered awning of a convenience store, back, pressed against the gray wall, both hands clutching a crumpled piece of paper and a ballpoint pen that had run dry. His breath came ragged, chest rising and falling like a broken instrument. Hunger growled in his stomach, cold seeped deeper into his skin. He felt as if he were fading from the city, from people's memories, even from himself. The click of high heels tapped against the wet pavement, weaving through the sparse sound of rain. He lifted his head, bloodshot eyes unfocused, until they caught on a small figure moving closer, an umbrella the color of deep ocean above her. She didn't hurry, unlike everyone else on the street. Her steps were light, deliberate, stretching the moment as if time itself slowed. Without realizing it, he tightened his grip on the wrinkled paper in his hands. When she reached him, she stopped. So sudden he thought he'd imagined it. But no. She lowered the umbrella, turned her head, and her gaze met his. How long had it been since anyone looked him straight in the eye? Not the quick, dismissive glance of strangers, not the cold scrutiny of shop clerks, but a real look, one human being seeing another. "Are you okay?" Her voice was gentle, clear, and warm, so different from the noise outside. Not loud, but enough to strike his eardrums like an unexpected chord in silence. A simple question, but for him it fell heavy as the whole sky. His mouth opened, then closed. It had been so long since he'd spoken that his voice felt locked inside him. At last, he only managed a small shake of the head. She regarded him for a moment. No curiosity, no fear, only presence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a hot sandwich wrapped in foil, steam still rising. "Here, eat this. I just bought it, it's still warm." He didn't take it right away. Pride held him back. Fear, too, that this might be another trick, another cruel joke. But her smile was soft, patient, not pressing. At last, his trembling hand reached out. The foil radiated warmth into his skin, straight to his heart. He unwrapped it. Heat and the smell of grilled meat and cheese drifted out. Simple, yet to him it was a luxury scent he hadn't breathed in for so long. His throat tightened. He bit off a small piece, chewing as tears pooled. The warmth slid down into his stomach, soothing the cramps as if part of him was being revived. "You must be cold," she said softly, slipping the wool scarf from her neck and offering it to him. It was brown, carrying the faint scent of soap, with a trace of woodsy perfume. He touched it, soft and comforting, the opposite of his damp, musty coat. "No, you don't need to," he stammered. "You need it more than I do." Her tone was firm but kind. She draped it around his neck with the care of an older sister adjusting her brother's collar. He sat frozen. Such an ordinary gesture, but for him it was something he thought he'd never feel again, to be cared for. Tears fell. He turned his head quickly, afraid he might break into sobs. But the tear had already traced a salty path to his lips. He whispered, "Why? Why are you helping me?" Her eyes shone steady and calm. "Because you're human too." 4 simple words pierced the wall he'd built around himself for so many bleak months. Human too. He'd stopped believing that after so many looks of disdain, so many refusals, so many times being chased off like a nuisance. 4 words pulled him back from the dark. In that moment, the world shifted. The rain no longer sounded like a cold drumming, but like a soft rhythm. The streetlight glow wasn't washed out anymore. It was a halo that held them both. For the first time in so long, he felt seen, touched, and most of all acknowledged. He clutched the paper in his hand, the crumpled sheet with half-finished words. Suddenly he knew what to write. Not just gratitude, but proof that this moment was real, that he had not disappeared. The man lifted his head. For the first time in months, there was light in his eyes. Not from the lamppost, but from within a small flame someone else had rekindled. He nodded faintly, whispered through the knot in his throat, "Thank you." The woman didn't say more. She only rested her warm hand on his shoulder for a brief moment, then stood. The green umbrella opened, covering them both for a heartbeat before she stepped away. Her figure melted into the rain, steady, unhurried. He remained there, scarf in hand, warmth still lingering. The hot food had eased his hunger, but more than that, the act itself had softened the frozen stone in his chest. A question burned inside him. If a stranger could see me, could call me human, maybe I still have a reason to go on. And in that moment, the homeless man knew life hadn't sealed shut the way he thought. A thin crack of light had opened in the dark. From there, everything could be different. The night had thinned after the rain, but the cold still lingered on the wet tiles and in the mist clinging to the walls. Under a narrow awning, the man pulled the brown wool scarf tighter around his neck. The warmth still carried the faint scent of soap, like an unseen hand holding him against the draft. On his knees lay a crumpled sheet of paper, its edges curled, streaked with half-formed words and blurred ink. In his purplish, cold, stiffened hand rested an old ballpoint pen, its tip scratchy like a fishbone stuck in the throat of fate, begging to be pulled free. He inhaled deeply. The air after rain carried the rusty smell of railings, the earthy scent of river mud rising from the embankment, and faintly the aroma of fresh bread from a bakery opening early down the street. That smell made his stomach clench, then eased the hot meal from earlier still left a trail of warmth in his chest. He tilted his head as if to listen for something faint. His heartbeat, the city breathing, or those 4 words that had pulled him out of darkness. Because you're human too. The pen touched paper. A dry scratch whispered audible only to the body that contained it. His hand trembled. He set the pen down, rubbed his palms together for warmth, and tried again. The nib released a drop of ink like a black bead of dew, pooling then spreading as he drew the line. The first letter wobbled clumsy like a child's first steps. He hunched to shield the page from stray drops still dripping off the awning, his own shoulders forming a roof over himself. Close up, the pen tip scraping across paper. Ink hesitating into shaky lines. Fingers calloused from cold and nights digging through trash. Knuckles swollen with old aches. The writing wandered like streets reflected in wind-rippled puddles. He didn't care about beauty, only truth. Each word formed was a fuller breath, a longer warmth running across his palm. He paused, swallowing against the raw sting in his throat. Tears welled without warning. Not from shame, not from hunger, but something softer from being named, being seen. He didn't wipe them away. For months he had avoided feelings like dodging traffic. Now he let them come, the burn in his eyes, the trembling of his lips, the dizzy disbelief that someone had stopped for him. Out on the street, a truck rumbled by. Its engine's bass tremor shook the paving stones. At the corner, the gray cat from the night before yawned inside its cardboard shelter, yellow eyes blinking. Street lamps flickered like drowsy eyelids. A garbage truck passed, sweeping a ribbon of light across his paper, binding his new words with a strip of gold. The city's breath and his beat together. He wrote, "To the one who stopped." The pen faltered, then revived. He gave it a shake. A tiny bead of ink fell like a black raindrop settling at the top of a letter. He closed his eyes for a beat, picturing her face beneath the green umbrella, not detailed, just warm outlines, listening eyes, a voice soft as a blanket laid over tired shoulders. He wanted to write her name but didn't know it. He wanted to describe her but stopped. Hard months had taught him that some truths need no adornment. Cut to his eyes, tiny red veins glinting under lamplight. Lashes trembling with each blink. A teardrop breaking loose, hesitating, then falling, leaving a clear curve across his skin. It struck the paper. The ink blurred slightly as if brushed by wind. He left it. That blur was proof he was still alive. He lowered the pen again. The message would not be long, he had decided. The worst months of his life compressed into 2 short lines. Everything else, regrets, excuses, apologies, he put aside. What remained was the essence of a heart, the one thing that could help him stand again. Slowly, firmly, he wrote, "Thank you for seeing me as a human being. Thank you for giving me the belief that I deserve to keep living." As he finished the last word, the pen paused, then bled one final dot of ink, like a period breathing. He let it stay. His ears caught a cascade of fragile sounds. Water dripping somewhere, a shutter rattling open at the far end of the street. A lone bird calling early. Beneath them all, his heartbeat. Not frantic with fear, not faltering with hunger, but steady, certain like a clock reset to the right time. He read the lines silently, then whispered them aloud to test their weight. They held. Not only held, they echoed faintly behind his ribs, building a bridge to tomorrow. He thought of adding more, a promise, a detail, a way for her to recognize the letter if fate returned. His pen scratched out, "I will," but stopped halfway through the S. In his mind, he saw the sentence erased, gone. Not because he had nothing to promise, but because sometimes fewer words hold more space for action, more room for change. He drew a comma, then left it. 2 sentences were enough for tonight. He folded the paper. His wrist trembled not from cold, but from a forgotten thrill, the trembling of holding something fragile and precious. The first fold cut across human being, the second down, keep living. The paper was old, but folded correctly. It became sturdy like a paper boat that wouldn't sink in a puddle. The shot widened, the man beneath the awning streetlight soft behind him. The city stretching like a giant body yawning before dawn. The sky at the horizon lightened a shade. He slipped the letter into his inner pocket, close to his heart. It felt like years ago when he had tucked his son's drawing into his wallet before leaving for work, a reminder of what mattered most. His breath changed. Inhales grew longer. Exhales no longer broke into faint groans. He rubbed his hands, pressed them to his cheeks, pulled the scarf higher. He looked at the waking street. Windows in the distance blinked out their nightlights. A few switched on with warm gold. At the corner, a street vendor pushed her cart, slowly, wheels squeaking softly. He watched her and felt himself part of the frame again, not a speck of dust on the lens. The wind touched his neck, tossing strands of gray hair. He smoothed them back, realizing his hand no longer shook as before. He pressed it to his pocket, felt the paper rustle against his fingertips. A small but certain presence, like a nod from within. The letter was warming with his body heat. Behind him, the cafe door from last night creaked open. A bell jingled. Clean white light spilled onto the floor, silvering the puddles. He turned his head. He no longer wanted to beg for water. He wanted to ask something else, something small yet enormous. Do you know a woman with a green umbrella who passes here? The question perched on his tongue, warm and winged. He swallowed it, saving it for the right time. Dawn had its part to finish before he knocked. A fresh breeze carried flour and butter again from the bakery. The smell stirred an image, a child clutching a warm roll, grinning, and himself the man in the picture bending to tie his son's shoe. The memory brushed through him, soft as cotton, not cutting, not tearing. He let it pass, then opened his eyes. Suddenly, small things looked sharper, droplets on grass, cracks, and pavement. The word open just lit on a sign. Close up again, his hand drew the letter out once more. He didn't open it. He only stroked the crease the way one might smooth a child's hair in sleep. He murmured, voice rough, "Thank you." Not words to send words to himself, to the night, to the first light. He realized for months he had whispered too many apologies to life, too few thanks. Two simple words. But because of that, powerful enough to warm his lungs. At his feet, a puddle mirrored the paling sky. His reflection no longer twisted as it had last night. His outline stood straighter, his shoulders less bent. The brown scarf wrapped around his neck looked like a band of calm. He smiled faintly, not wide, but a small curve that changed his whole face. Footsteps approached the street-sweeping crew. The man in the orange raincoat frowned when he saw him. His look still wary, but less harsh than last night. The man rose, folded his old raincoat, careful not to soak the dry patch. "I cleaned it," he said, surprised at his own voice, surprised at its calm. The worker paused, then gave a short nod. "Yeah." One syllable, but for him it was recognition. He left the awning. Each step sent warmth up his legs. Ahead, the embankment brightened. The river turned to silver, rippling with wind. He stopped where last night he'd thought his darkest thoughts. At that same railing, he pressed a hand to his chest, firm, as if nailing a signboard in place. "I am still here." Then he bent, adjusted his backpack, pulled the stub of a pen from his pocket. He stared at it a long moment, this worn-out pen that had carried him through so many lost nights, and smiled. Today, he whispered, "You wrote something worth keeping." The shot slid back to the paper, two bold lines, ink-dry watermarks faint as wood grain. At the bottom, a blank space waited for tomorrow. Perhaps an address, a meeting time, a clue. But tonight, the blank was beautiful enough, a place where hope could rest. A morning bus screeched to a stop, doors hissing open. A few passengers climbed aboard, eyes still heavy with sleep. He watched them, not feeling left behind. He didn't need to board. He had his own line to follow, the one leading to the girl with the green umbrella, the one carrying his letter to the hand that placed a brown scarf around his neck, the one running from "thank you" to "keep living." He turned, half lit by dawn, lines on his face softened. He slipped the letter close to his heart. A small act, but great things, he knew now, begin this way. Then he walked on slowly past puddles reflecting the sky, past the glowing open sign, past the gray cat stretching its back. The cat looked up, yellow eyes like twin lanterns. He nodded to it. He had never thought to greet a cat before. But it turns out once you've been seen, you begin to see back. Everything has presence. Everything deserves a name. Amid the hiss of tires and the smell of bread, the man with a letter against his heart, with short words carrying long warmth, stepped out of the damp frame of the night. The camera followed for a few beats, then stopped, fixing on the space he left behind. There, the last drops of rain fell and vanished into the first rays of sun. Two quiet sentences of thanks, but they carried farther than any horn. And in that moment, somewhere inside him, a tiny door clicked open. Not loud, not with fanfare, just a small tick enough for one ray of light to slip through. Dawn poured into the city. The sun had not yet risen fully above the horizon, but its first rays slipped through window panes, painting thin golden streaks across the streets. The scrape of brooms echoed from the corners, the creak of a bread cart's wheels, the call of a vendor. Hot, sticky rice here signaled the world stirring awake. The heavy night just past seemed to retreat into memory, making way for a new day. The man sat up beneath the familiar awning. His coat was still damp, but the wool scarf around his neck held warmth. His hand slipped into his inner pocket and found the folded letter. His fingers brushed its rough edges, a reminder he still had a reason to keep going. He pulled it out, opened a corner, and read the words blurred by tears. "Thank you for seeing me as a human being. Thank you for giving me the belief that I deserve to keep living." He closed his eyes, letting his breath fall into rhythm with the waking city. From his chest spread a quiet warmth, no longer from food or fabric, but from something greater, faith. Faith that kindness still existed, that every darkness had a crack of light, that even a man thought invisible still held value worth being seen. His hand tightened as though sealing an oath with himself. I will send this letter. I will find a way to give it to the one who gave me a second life. The next day, he began looking for odd jobs. At first, small tasks, carrying crates for a shop, wiping tables at a food stall, cleaning cars for hire. The same hands that had once trembled while writing now gripped brooms, lifted chairs, pushed carts. Each time he faltered, he pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the letter rustle lightly against his skin. An unseen engine, whispering, "You can, you must." Not every door opened. Many shook their heads. Many eyes still carried suspicion. But unlike before, he no longer surrendered after the first rejection. He had learned one truth. Sometimes it takes only one person to see you, and the whole world begins to shift. So he stepped forward, small steps, but steady. One afternoon, while clearing tables, he noticed a young family, father, mother, and a little boy. The child spilled soda, laughed. The mother hurried to wipe it. The father tapped his son's head, gently smiling. The man froze, heart-aching memories of his own family crashed down. But this time he didn't retreat into shadows. He smiled faintly, bent down, and handed them a clean rag. Within that smile lived sorrow, but also resolve. One day he would stand before his son again, not as a broken man, but as one who had risen. At night, beneath the old awning, he unfolded the letter again. No one told him to add more words, but each time he read it, strength refilled him. He realized the letter wasn't only for the stranger who helped him. It was also for himself. A mirror reminding him he was not invisible, not useless, not finished. Days passed. The brown scarf faded of its soapy scent, but he kept it. The letter's edges frayed from being unfolded too often, but he guarded it like treasure. Both became reminders he had been saved, and he could save himself. The camera widens. The man pushes a hired cart down the street, sweat beading on his brow, lips pressed tight, eyes shining. A boy selling lottery tickets runs past. The man pauses, rests a hand on the child's shoulder, and gives him half the bread he carried. The boy stares up, startled. The man smiles. Eat. You've got a long way to go. In the child's eyes, he saw his own reflection from yesterday, and that made his stride quicker toward tomorrow. The narration flows in a deep, steady voice like a slow hymn. Sometimes the smallest gesture, a question, a scarf, a warm meal becomes the rope, pulling someone out of despair. You never know how far kindness can reach. For some, it is not just comfort. It is life itself. Close up one last time, the letter in his hand. The paper worn, the words intact, the edges creased, but the meaning eternal. He folds it, tucks it back against his chest where his heart beats steady. He lifts his gaze to the glowing city. For the first time in years, his eyes are not lost, they are determined. Call to action whispered to the audience like a promise. If you believe in the power of kindness, share this story. Someone out there may be waiting for just one gesture from you. How long has it been since you helped a stranger? Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that stir the heart. The camera fades out, the man walking among the brightening streets, his shadow blending into the stream of life. Not apart, but apart. Music swells, then softens, leaving the echo of words both fragile and unbreakable. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep living.